Hi, long range hunting. What you are about to see is extremely graphic. Honestly, I don't know why I have to say that because you're hunters. This is part of hunting. If you can't stand blood, guts, brains, etc., meat, how do you hunt? Viewer discretion is advised. If you're a hunter, I really advise that you should watch this video so you know what you're doing and what happens in real life when you shoot an animal. All of these shots were taken by highly skilled marksmen and hunters. Do not, I repeat, do not try this at home. Unless you have property in the backyard where you can hunt right outside your house, then heck, go for it. Good on you. Side note, you might want to go outside. If your wife is making dinner for you or breakfast and she's not paying attention and you shoot a deer from your table inside the house, that does not go over well. Just saying, that might get you killed. Enjoy the videos. Hi, long range hunting. Today we're talking about one of the most talked about topics out there in the hunting community in general, and that is meat loss. Now, to start this off, something real quick, meat loss is essential. Now you say, what do you mean by that? Well, here's the thing. There is no way to get rid of meat loss and have good terminal ballistics. If you're getting minimal meat loss or no meat loss, that's because you're not getting a projectile that actually works. That bullet is not giving you good terminal performance. If somebody tells you that you can get good terminal performance with zero meat damage, they are lying to you. That is nothing more than a fantasy. I'm going to break everything down for you, show you why you're getting meat loss, etc. And there are ways to minimize that. But there's a big difference between minimizing meat loss and trying to eliminate meat loss. So, you have fantasy and reality, and we're going to be debunking the fantasy, bringing forth the reality, and showing you guys what's causing the damage and how you can cut down on that and get better terminal ballistics. Now, terminal ballistics is very important. That is what your bullet does when it goes through the body. For those who have watched my previous videos, just bear with me. I need to break this down so as we go, everybody understands and is on the same page. So this is going to be a very basic breakdown. You can watch my other videos and see what I say there, and you can see different examples, but this is just a basic overview. So terminal ballistics is what happens when the projectile goes through. You have three ballistics. You have internal, which happens inside the gun. External, that's your wind and bullet drop as it goes to the target. And once it reaches your target, the animal or whatever you're shooting, then you have your terminal ballistics. Now, terminal ballistics has a couple of different kinds of wound cavities. You have a permanent wound cavity. That is the path from that bullet crushing through the body. And then you have your temporary wound cavity, which if you watch ballistics gel, you're going to see it expand violently and then collapse back. That is your temporary wound cavity. That's the energy that people talk. Now, the reason we get this energy transfer is because we are dealing with water-based mammals. Now, with a mammal having a water base, just like humans, we have a water base, which is why we have terminal ballistics when somebody gets shot. The animal, what's happening is there's displacement as that bullet hits with velocity. Now, great way to think about this is a pool and a giant rock. If you take a giant rock, drop it in a pool from a height, what's going to happen is that rock is going to hit and you're going to get a displacement of water. There will be basically an air pocket around. So it's going to hit, it's going to expand, and then that water is going to collapse back on it. And that's what's happening. Now, that temporary wound cavity is happening faster than the eye can see. You have to use slow motion to see it. If you're using ballistics gel, you're going to have to slow that down so you can actually see it. Now, with those temporary wound cavities, we have two. hydrostatic shock and hydraulic shock, and that is velocity dependent and bullet performance. Now, under 2,200 feet per second, what's going to happen with hydrostatic shock is that bullet's going to enter, you're going to get that displacement. Think of a rubber band. If you take a large rubber band, stretch it in all directions until it starts to come apart, there's fibers broke, it's structurally damaged. That is hydrostatic shock. So it's going to go through there, that temporary wound cavity is going to cause damage, etc. It's going to rupture stuff, cause massive internal bleeding. Then it's going to collapse back and you're left with that permanent wound cavity. Now, your permanent wound cavity is going to be around the size or slightly larger than the max width of that bullet's diameter as far as expansion. That's not the case with hydraulic shock. Now with hydraulic shock, where you're over 2,200 feet per second, with proper performance, you're going to get a much larger temporary wound cavity. This is why rifles are more lethal and effective than a pistol. Now, what's happening is take that same rubber band and you're going to stretch it until it explodes. That's effectively what's happening. Because what's happening is it's stretching beyond that elasticity point and to where it's ripping. So even the body itself. Now, the body might be water-based. However, the meat and the organs like the heart, the lungs, the liver are non-elastic, which is why you get damage. So when that bullet goes in there and crushes, the body might expand, but those organs don't, which is why you're getting that tissue damage. Now with hydrostatic shock, your temporary wound cavity opens up and it collapses to the size of that permanent wound cavity. With hydraulic shock though, your temporary wound cavity effectively becomes your permanent because it's tearing and exploding everything in there. You're now making a larger permanent wound cavity. This one gives you help with shot placement. If you're a little bit off, you don't have to worry about it. Not only are you going to cause more trauma, more blood loss, put that animal down quickly, shutting down the CNS, but it does give you a lot of forgiveness as far as shot placement goes. Now, we only strive to go point of aim, point of impact, but it's hunting, stuff happens. Now, coming off of that topic, why do we see meat damage? It's that same thing. It is that temporary wound cavity, whether it's hydrostatic shock or hydraulic shock. That's what's causing that meat damage. I hear guys all the time, they'll see holes like this, and they go, oh, that's a huge entrance hole, or that's a huge exit hole, and the bullet blew up, especially on the entrance ones. They're like, oh, the bullet blew up, and that's what caused it. Well, this isn't steel. When a bullet hits steel like this, you're going to see it's going to expand all the way and then it's going to go out. It's an object in motion meeting an unmovable force. And so when it hits that, it's only got one way to go, and that path of least resistance. So with an animal, we don't have that. So with that bullet hitting and it opening up, even if it does mushroom, whether the bullet's too short or whatever the case might be, even if you manage to expand all the way to the back, and those fragments come off, those are still moving in a forward direction because they haven't met that unstoppable force yet. They haven't met that resistance or stopped due to that loss in velocity. So that hole is not being caused by the bullet itself exploding or anything like that. That's just the easiest thing that comes to people's minds. What's actually happening is that's that hydraulic shock. So if you see where under the hide you've got a nice bullet hole through the hide, and then the rib cage, there's a large hole and or with meat damage going down the sides, that is simply from the hydraulic shock. Now, we talked about this. It expands past the elasticity point, and that's what's happening. And what's happening is for either the bullet design is causing this, the impact velocity being too high, and what's happening is it's starting that temporary wound cavity early. So it's massively opening up and it's starting it right in that rib cage, and that's what's causing that hole, and then it's continuing through the body. So basically what you're seeing with those big holes is that temporary wound cavity is starting early and you basically shifted it. So the rest of that's still going inside, and that's what you're seeing. Basically what happened in the chest cavity is just starting on the outer part. Now there are ways to avoid that, changing impact velocity, bullet designs we'll get into on why you are getting that. But the reason you get what I call the spiraling meat damage, and a lot of people talk about this, where they hit and they're going to see something like this, where there is meat damage going down the side and the meat is just messed up. Now, that doesn't have to have that big hole when it has that. It can do it with or without that. The most damage I've ever seen was with a round nose 30-30. in my Model 94 Winchester, hit a deer at 70 yards and it just completely obliterated the side. It actually separated that front shoulder, because remember, that front shoulder is not attached by bone or a socket. It is just held on there by meat and tissue, by muscles. Now, I found this video on Facebook. It's got their logo right there, so that's their thing. But what it's showing is they're using an air compressor to skin the animal, because that hide, a lot of people don't realize, you can actually pull it away with your hands. Once you get that initial part, there's just a little bit of connective tissue and you can actually pull it apart. Well, that air, you can make a small incision, put that hose in, and what's going to do is it's going to bring air in between. And that's what's happening with that hydraulic shock when you're getting that meat damage clear down the side at high velocities. Because what's happening is it's starting that temporary wound cavity early, and the path of least resistance is going in between there. And so instead of it moving inside first, it's going to go through that easy path, and it's going through that side. You'll see this at high velocity, close range. Sometimes you'll see it hit, and it almost looks like a ripple effect going down the body. And then you have massive meat damage like this where you're going down the side. And that's what's happening. Because again, that meat, just like the heart and lungs, is non-elastic. And so as that energy transfer goes through there, it's damaging all that meat instead of damaging the inside like you want. Now, as always, I've got my beautiful artwork, so we're going to go through this and show you why exactly you're getting this meat damage, that excessive down the side. Now, I mentioned the round nose. That is one of the worst offenders, especially high velocity. So what people don't realize is surface contact has a big part in this. Even when it's inside, when it's expanding, the wider that bullet is expanding, the more displacement you're going to get. So on the initial, if you take a round nose projectile and you talk about the max diameter just of the projectile itself, non-expanded, it's much thicker up here than a bullet like this, which represent ELD match, TMKs, A-tips, etc. What's happening is your max is right here. So you only have to go this far before you're hitting the max width. Whereas this, you're coming back here in order to hit that same one. So this is going to penetrate more with less surface contact. And then as this is in, it's going to start to expand. So this is going to result in you getting more penetration prior to expansion and less meat damage. Now this, on the other hand, you only have to go right here and you're at that max point, and it's going to start expanding from there. And so with a round nose design or a soft point, you're getting more expansion up front because that increased surface contact, which when it does that, it's starting that temporary wound cavity. So when you're hitting high velocity with a projectile like this, it's going to start that temporary wound cavity and send it through that meat versus getting it all inside. I don't recommend round noses. Do they have their place? Can you use them? Sure. I've just found excessive damage just because, again, you have that increased surface contact, which is not aiding you in anything. This is going to give you much better results. You're going to get less surface contact as it goes in. It's going to start that temporary wound cavity later as far as getting in. Now, even with this, if you get into the thin jacket bullets, every projectile out there has its minimum impact velocity and its maximum. So with a certain type of bullet, you're going to have a maximum that you're going to want to push it at, and then you're going to have your minimum, which is your minimums for expansion. If you hit beyond that high point, what you can do is get too much expansion too quickly, and that's going to result in transferring that through. So even with this design, if you take it outside of its limits, which I see guys do a lot, they want, to push these rounds at crazy velocities with lighter bullets. That way they can try to compensate for wind. Instead of training to learn the wind, they want to just try to eliminate as much as it can velocity, not understanding terminal ballistics. If you're target shooting, that's one thing. But even then, heavier is better as far as it's going to give you a better BC. It's going to go continually longer. Yeah, the initial velocity is better as far as the smaller ones with magnums, etc., but they're going to bleed off energy, and in the long run, the heavier projectile is going to win out. BC will always win out. However, if you use them inside their limits, this is incredible. This is from a high shoulder shot that I just got in my deer in Oklahoma. You can see minimal meat damage. There's just a slight little sliver in there as far as what I had to remove. We're talking across the board, I lost ounces. It's not pounds. That's, we'll talk about that. That's unrealistic as far as what a lot of people think. But the other factor too is the bullet itself, sectional density, length, etc. So let's take these two. Same projectile, we have one that's heavier, one that's lighter. So with a lighter projectile, it's going to be shorter. And so this is not going to be as long. With a shorter one, you're meeting your max surface diameter right here. And so just like this, with this type of bullet, if you're going really lightweight, it's stubbing it down, which is great for varmints and stuff where you don't have a lot of impact resistance and depth of penetration. And so this is why people use varmint rounds, lightweight, high velocity, is to get it to expand and dump that energy into that, little animal. Now, where you're going to have problems with this, though, is the fact that you do get that more surface contact right up front. And so this, going with that lighter, higher velocity of too light of a projectile without the correct sectional density and construction, is going to result in that energy transfer starting a lot sooner, which again can lead to meat damage. Now this one, however, the same projectile but longer and higher weight is going to give you much more. So you're talking here versus here for your maximum surface contact. Now, are you going to get meat damage? Absolutely. But again, we can somewhat control it. We can get it down to a reasonable amount. Ethics are everything. A quick, clean kill is exactly what we want. And again, it's a fairy tale if you think that you can achieve that with zero meat damage. Again, anybody that tells you that is lying to you. There is a certain amount of meat damage no matter what. The only way to not get meat damage is to really hit the head, and even then it can cause meat damage in the neck depending on the projectile and how it's shot. Now, how do we minimize that meat loss while still getting good terminal ballistics? Well, one thing is go with a different bullet design. If you've been running round noses and you're getting a lot of meat damage, switch to something more aerodynamic, like a burger, hybrid, that type of design, ELD match, TMK, something more streamlined that's going to lengthen that projectile and give it a less surface contact up front. Going heavier is going to aid you in that. I actually just read an article the other day, one of the stupidest ones I've ever seen, where a guy was trying to claim that heavy bullets, longer bullets, are actually what causes meat damage, which is absolutely ridiculous. You're going to decrease your meat damage by going with a heavier projectile. It's going to increase that sectional density, and it's going to aid you in that length of just bullet design, getting you inside and dumping that energy, versus a shorter, fatter one is not going to do the same thing and is going to cause that temporary wound cavity to open up a little bit sooner. Now, if you do want to run round noses, or that's your only option, or a soft point, you can either change your shot placement. Don't go for shoulders until a certain impact velocity. You can, if you're reloading, decrease that muzzle velocity to begin with, because realistically, if you're hunting with a round nose projectile, you're not shooting distance. There's no aerodynamics there, so you're going to lose gyroscopic stability very quickly. No matter what velocity you're pushing at, it's just not an aerodynamic bullet. And so if you're using round nose soft points, either change your shot placement or, decrease that velocity. If you're running factory ammo and can't do that, shot placement is your best friend. I like to say, just go for the head if you're really that worried about meat damage, but the head is a very small target. If you go back to the episode 1 of this, where I talk about headshots, it's going to show you how small that target actually is. And then you add a lot of guys go to the range prior to hunting season, see how bad a lot of people are at shooting. Then you add adrenaline, buck fever, all that into there, and that becomes a very, very small target. So, I recommend getting better bullets and learning that projectile and its limitations in order to get great terminal ballistics and still not waste meat. Now, again, the whole waste meat thing, I hear a lot of crap about that. I want to touch on this really quick, but this is an actual shoulder from my buck that I just got, and this is how much the meat actually weighed off that entire thing. So what's seen there is what got taken off, put in there. we're talking half a pound of meat for that shoulder. So we're looking at a pound roughly of meat for both front shoulders. There's not a lot of meat to begin with. If you look at this, you can see the rear legs are significantly larger than the front. 70% of your meat is coming from your rear legs and your back straps. A lot of people don't realize the ribs don't give you anything really, which is why most people go for it. A lot of people don't even take ribs because there is so little meat in there and it's a pain in the butt. Even a lot of butchers won't mess with it. So, when you shoot the ribs or front shoulder, you're not damaging a whole lot of meat. People have this unrealistic expectation of meat, just like they have an unrealistic expectation of meat damage, or lack of that. But I mean, a whitetail buck, you're looking pound and a half roughly between both front shoulders, depending on the size of the deer and where it's located. So, I mean, there's not a lot. People have these really unrealistic expectations. So don't buy into all that. It's, you're losing ounces. Even if you damage an entire side of ribs, you're not losing pounds. Depending on the animal, you might lose a pound if it damaged the entire one side. But realistically, when you see it on the ribs, you're just getting a little bit. Now, one other thing I want to point out real quick is this. Now, this is just blood pooling. A lot of people waste meat because of this. What's going to happen is they see that and they don't realize that's just blood pooling on top of it. It's underneath that layer and it's that blood pooling. And all you have to do is remove that and the meat underneath is fine. So a lot of people see that, go, oh my God, it's damaged. It's terrible. I'm going to throw it out. And they're throwing out perfectly good meat that you just need to get that blood off of. That blood is just pooling just because it died. Remove that. You're good to go. So another thing you can do besides changing designs is change designs and go with a smaller diameter. You don't need a Magnum to kill. It's not even remotely necessary for anything in North America. The only one I would say that it's really necessary for is if you're going for something like an elephant. But there's no reason with 99.9% of the animals in this earth that you can't kill it with a smaller caliber with a good projectile. Going down in diameter, though, a lot of people don't realize how you defeat body armor is speed and smaller diameters. The FN57 is a perfect example of that. It was built to defeat body armor by giving a small diameter and a high velocity. But again, going through that's a little bit different as far as what we're talking about, but it's the same thing as far as when you decrease that diameter, you're decreasing that surface contact area. And so you can get less meat damage from that smaller projectile just by the diameter being smaller and that less surface contact, and then it's going to expand and go in there. And when you get into those lighter ones, if you're going heavy for caliber, like, running the 108s or the 110 A-tips, and my gun in my 6 Creed, it's a longer bullet. I'm not getting full maximum until almost halfway down the bullet of that surface contact, the bullet diameter, but it's going to give me great terminal ballistics. It's going to zip through easier. It's going to give you less meat damage. It's going to open up. And again, here's the thing. It doesn't matter what diameter as far as caliber goes. If you're using the wrong bullet, you're still going to get it. You're still going to get that, excessive meat damage if you're using a round nose and that, because again, though you're gone down in diameter, you're still getting that initial contact of that max width of diameter faster than you are with another projectile. So, that's why I always preach not only for the ballistic coefficient, going heavy for caliber with match bullets, Bergers, etc., but it's also going to allow you to get in there, go in, cause the necessary damage while minimum meat damage. That one in Oklahoma, that you saw was just a sliver. That was a 6 Creedmoor. It was 513 yards on doe. It anchored it on the spot, did a phenomenal job. Now, in conclusion, I hope this has really helped everybody, a little bit better understanding of what's going on, how to fix those issues as far as meat damage, and again, use reality, because this is where we live in reality. Again, if somebody tells you they can give you a bullet that's going to cause no meat damage and incredible terminal ballistics, they're lying to you. Just plain and simple. There's no physical way for that to be possible. So as a hunter, you need to not only understand how your projectile works, but you also got to have a realistic view. So are you losing buckets and buckets of meat? No. Can you lose realistically excess amounts from using bullets like round noses or taking a bullet beyond its maximum? Yes, you can. But again, this is simple stuff that's operator error, either from not understanding how the bullet works or using the wrong projectile type and wrong velocity. So, you know, it really helps to know what you're doing, understand it. You guys can always ask questions in the comments below. I will always try to help out with that. But, you know, your bullet design is really what's causing that meat damage. And so if you're really worried about that meat damage and losing that little bit of meat, it's very simple. Change bullets or change your impact velocity or shot placement. Now, I hope everybody had a good hunting season. If you guys still are going on your current hunting season, good luck to you. Everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting. It's not that hard, people.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video. And happy hunting!